Good morning again, and yeah, thanks for coming. How do you feel about yesterday? How do you feel today? Good? Any question arose during the evening or the night? Well, if you have any question, come at some point, let me know. And yeah, let's move on to the final day, which is today, second day of the workshop. So where we were yesterday, can someone just like recap in 2 sentences what we did, what we learned? Say one people can let me know what we collectively learned in terms of knowledge, and another one can let me know what kind of skills we touched.
Kind of explain the physics part of the sun rays and the moon rays.
Yeah.
And how they are heating up the planet.
Yes.
And the atmosphere.
Yes. Under the term of the name of what the phenomenon name.
Greenhouse.
Yeah. Awesome. So that's what we learned. How did we learn that? What skills?
We got to experiment.
Yeah.
To play.
Yeah.
To do some statistics.
Yes. Right. And so what we saw, what we learned was this effect of greenhouse. And what is the main one that we talked always about? The main greenhouse gas.
CO2.
Yeah. So where did it come from? Sorry? Fossil fuel. Is that the only source? What are the fossil fuels actually? And where are they coming from actually? From the Earth, yeah. So what are they? We're talking about what? Yeah, dead plants, okay. Dead plants, how come dead plants are making petrol to use my car? And why is it dangerous for the planet? Any dead plants can do that? Yeah.
Fossilized.
Fossilized, yeah. So they're under.
There's some carbon in big amounts.
Yeah.
So we light it up, burn it, and a lot of carbon dioxide comes out of it.
Comes out of it. And where does it go?
To the atmosphere?
Only?
No, to the plants too.
To the plants too? Why?
Because of photosynthesis.
Yes. And then if it comes to plant, then it may go back to fossil.
Yes.
Okay? Is it fast? Oh,
It's
no.
very slow.
Yeah, but photosynthesis is fast.
Yes.
So we've got different spaces, areas where we can find carbon dioxide. And obviously, if we talk about greenhouse effect, then we talk mainly about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But what's interesting to work on with students, or like anyone, is to have a bigger look at the motion of the carbon dioxide from the ground, because we always say, oh, we take petrol and gas from the ground, but what does it go? And then we talk about we talk about planting trees, because planting trees is good because it's capturing the CO2. But then, so we've got this, idea of, okay, it's moving from one part to another. And actually, yeah, we kind of like always think about this carbon cycle, right? Do we actually know how it works? Do you know how carbon cycle works?
It's kind of goes in the food chain.
It kind of goes to the food chain, but then in the atmosphere, or when it goes out from the atmosphere, is that food chain? Or do you know any other? So we talked about atmosphere, right? We talked about plants. You talk about food chain, so maybe animals as well. How come animals have carbon? They eat it,
They plants.
They eat plants, right? So they got carbon from that. Do you think about other animals that can have carbon, other ways? Can you think about other like other type of ways to have carbon? We were talking about like eating, but some animals have carbon otherwise. Think about in the sea, what do we have? Oh, fish and so on, but also. Yeah. Yeah, that's fun too. But we've got actually like small algae, we've got all of the microscopic algae, and the shells. All of them actually have carbon in their structure. In the shell, also in the anatomy of the microplankton, for instance. So that's another way to capture carbon, which is not photosynthesis, but it's more like what we call calcification. So getting the carbon out from the water or the atmosphere to the shell, and so on. So we've got atmosphere, we've got land, plants, and animals. We've got plants and animals in the water. And then, how about the water? Does water in the ocean or anywhere has carbon?
It's kind of dissolves
Yes,
in the water.
exactly. So they're like dissolution of the carbon in the ocean. So that's another way where we can find the carbon. And then we talked about fossil fuels, which are under the ground, and the soil as well. So soil also has carbon, of course. Which stones has a lot of carbon?
Limestone.
Yes, limestone. Where do they come from? In the majority of them? Sorry? Yeah, sedimenters. And of sedimentation of what?
Different animals.
Yes, so we've got plants that transform into rocks. So here you see there are like different places, different reservoirs actually we call them, storage of carbon on the planet. And they are all connected together. So what I propose to you is to play a little game. To explore the question of this carbon. Sorry, I'm trying to find out how to do that trick again of getting my screen on. Ah, yeah, here we are. So, you've got this board game on your tables. And see on the board game, we've got all of the different elements we were talking about. Atmosphere is one of the big reservoirs. The one we are all talking about when we talk about greenhouse effect. But then when you think about where the carbon comes from, then we've got lands, plants, and animals. We've got soil, we've got fossil resources, we've got oceanic animals and plants, we've got ocean in itself. And here you see arrows that kind of like draw a cycle or connections between all of them. And you see that there is one big cycle here with that part as well. And all of those changes, can you name one of those? For instance, from say atmosphere to plants.
Photosynthesis.
Yeah, photosynthesis. Photosynthesis, we take carbon from CO2 to put it in the plant through photosynthesis, which came from sugar, and then dioxygen, just go that. And then the plant can die and it goes into the soil. Some processes are very slow and some processes are very fast. But one process is very, very slow and very doesn't occur naturally, very often at least, is that fossil resources, they stay in the ground very, 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 very much, as in a normal environment without human resources, human action. Fossil resources don't really emerge at the surface, very rarely, and We know from antique time, the Romans and the Egyptians used to use a bit of petrol and gas to make some surfaces, and they started to work with it, but they didn't really pay attention to it. It was not resources at that time. So it was very rare that carbon from fossil resources will go out in the other cycle, in the main cycle. So in our game, we choose to ignore fossil fuel in the first part, because in average, in the proportion of the changes and the circulation of carbon, the fossil resources naturally don't really play a big role. It's a very minor role. But the majority of the roles are actually exchanges between all the other groups of fossil. And you see the little numbers here. Those numbers are an equivalent of a ton of carbon in the different reservoirs. So basically what it is that we took numbers from the literature, from scientists who just work a lot on those topics, especially since climate change science, and they can quantify the average number of carbon that is dissolved in the ocean, that is in the atmosphere, and so on. And then for the sake of the game, we made some calculation, and so we have those numbers. And those numbers are represented in your game with little Legos, like that. So the Legos have to be put, so the big ones are 10, 5 are the middle one, and 1 are the first small one here. So you can maybe place them, and I'm thinking on the spot that it's not very clear what we did, but we will try to work out if it works or not. The thing is, after, you have cards to play, and the cards are a way to exchange carbon from one place to another. So the cards are those ones. So you don't have to use those ones there. Just use the one with the text. Okay?
You take all the green ones out?
Yeah. So you can take all the green one out and keep the one with the text. And for the first phase of the game, we only use for the first time of the game, we only use the blue ones. Yeah. The yellow one, you just take them out for the first phase, and then I've got it here. It'll be easier. And you shuffle it. Very important. You shuffle it. Okay.
So I really took the time to see that
I know. Oh man, sorry. Well, you can play in order, it doesn't really matter, but it's just more fun if you do it. And I'm thinking of something. Okay, you've got that. Maybe you have an issue. Let's try that. But if you've got an issue, do you know if I can find more one? So I'll just put that one with 5 little ones, but then they have to move between
25 more. 20 more. For each group, 5 more.
for each group. No, you know what? No, it's okay. It's okay. You can sit down. Good. What I'm going to do, I'm going to have to Is one per group. Okay, I'm changing a bit just for the sake of the game now. So there's just one little more here. Because otherwise it will be more complex. Okay, then put it on. But maybe, yeah, if you guys start with it once, that'll be helpful. But we'll see how it works. Okay, once you shuffled it, you can draw one card after another and play together. And the aim is to, so you just like hide it and then take the first one. And then you read it, or just from the drawing, and you're like, okay, respiration, fermentation, or decomposition. And by reading the text, you should know from which reservoir the carbon is going to which one. So try to work in groups, and then if you don't understand one card, by discussing and stuff, you can ask me or we can discuss it by group. I'm just worried about if you find out at some point you don't have enough like small ones to move, then we'll see how it goes. One last thing, that is the major thing, is that with the pen, you can place a pen on the thermometer. And you start. So you all start with a pen or something that is placed here in the average temperature of 15 degrees. Okay? So that's the average temperature of the planet Earth before climate change due to human activities. And every time you add more carbon in the atmosphere, you have to put a bit more carbon, like you have to put 0.1 degree more here, okay? So you have to move out your little cursor, your little arrow. So you place like something, like a pen or something, and you move the pen. Say I've got one more coin here in the atmosphere, the temperature like increases. If I've got less, if my atmosphere has less, then I just put it down. Okay? And the aim of the game is to see at the end, by playing all the cards, where does it go? Okay? Where is the final temperature of my planet Earth once I've done all the circles? Yeah.
Is the amount of the carbon also described on the sheets?
No, it's described in the sheet of the.
So how can we figure out which one to move?
Oh yeah, no, it's always one.
Oh.
It's always one. Yeah.
No matter which one.
Oh no, it has to be from one specific place to another according to the.
Yes.
To the thing.
One.
Oh, this one is like 1, and this one is like 5,
But the
and
amounts
10.
are
Always 1. Yeah. So that's why I gave you more one little coin, because they will move more than the other ones. It actually will be the only one moving. But the thing is, we use, like a big amount to represent the reality. Okay? But then in the moving, you'll see it's only one moving at a time. Okay? You don't have it? Okay, so once you have your things placed, then you put like your arrow here. That's the original thing, okay? And now you draw one of the cards, one after another. So say they're all like mixed together. And you start to move out. This one will be for Sorry, second turn. Shuffle it.
We have a question.
Yeah.
Our atmosphere doesn't have the little ones anymore.
Yeah, right.
So,
And you need like a little one.
yeah.
Okay, that's. I was worried about it.
What can we do about it?
That's-
Just memorize it or?
Yeah, or just put like a little coin. Yeah, that was my worry. Okay, so lens photosynthesis. Do you know how it works? Yeah. So how should we? So is it like where the carbon comes from and where it goes? Yes. So you move one real one from here, you put it here. So you've got one less in the atmosphere. Therefore, your temperature decreases. Okay. So then you throw another one, then the synthesis, so one more here. That's where we've got an issue. It's like you move here, so you know that you've got one less, let's say. So it's less here. And then you keep doing. That's what shuffle. So it's my issue. Yeah, we should have only one little ligos. And then you've got dissolution. So what is carbon dioxide from the atmosphere dissolves in water. So it should be atmosphere to water. Then this one says here. It's annoying because I don't have proper little ones. But you've got to get, right? I'll try to find some more small ligos. Okay?
Fine, how do we get it?
Yeah, okay. Okay, I'll try to find more small ligos.
Aga siis kui
If you have it, like anything that's like just like one little coin,
Yeah.
plenty of it, because then that'll be there. That's my bad. Yeah, cool.
Ja siis me tegime punne juurde.
see peaks olema
Oh yeah, that's clever. We can put. Where is it?
It's from this.
Yeah, I saw it this morning. Oh, it has been removed. The big box. So we can do your. Yes. Cool. Yeah, we've got one solution maybe. Oh, we've got Legos as well coming. Yeah, that's more clever actually.
siis ühesed liiguvad kogu aeg.
Oh, yeah, cool.
Maybe even different things.
Oh yeah, and they were using plasticines. Good as well.
ei, need on nad printsivad. Need peaksid nagu mõlema poole. Nendega ei ole.
Yeah.
Praegu vist ei ole. Nii palju kui see tahab.
And you can transform it into
Mul ei ole ka.
okay, that should
Ta teeb seda. Vaata, see lihtsalt ongi see, ta teeb iga inimest, ta ei teinud juurde.
So I think
Minul on ka sama, ei tea ju, mida õpetajad teavad, midagi teavad. Ma teen ikka kogu aeg samamoodi mingi olla. no see on põhimõtteliselt.
ei, ma saan aru, et mida või kuhu me nüüd
ühe nublu liigutades ühe selle kraadi võrra
vabaneb siis üles ja seob kuidas ma neid seotan? Teil on
So you got real plasticine is good. We can look some blue ones. Four, five. Okay, 1, 2, 1. That's also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that's your initial group, right? Okay, so try it and then we see how it goes. Thank you. Okay, I can transform a bit because one, okay? So 1, 2,
so much.
5.
ja noh, need kõik tegelikult on üksteist saama ainult liigutada. kui tõmbame siit siis kaart nagu teed, siis liigutame selle CO2 kuhu iganes
then 15 down, 60 more. Some more. I'm gonna get one more. Okay, you guys start to play. I'm gonna do this. And then you move your okay, that's just good. No, they won't move, and that's a mistake we made for the game. Because we wanted to make it very realistic. So it had to be very much. You have to be very much like proportions of how much. Ocean is a big reservoir, so we have way more than the other reservoirs. And then for practicality, we were okay, we have big bars for 10, small bars for 5, and very, very small one for 1. So then by blending with Lego, for instance, it's hard because, of course, only the small ones will move. At some point, if you move all of the small ones, then you will cut the big ones into small parts. But because we don't have like poker games or like other games where you've got more and you can change it and so on, here with Lego it's a bit weird. So yeah, let's try to work like that. And so it's only one.
So there are like 5 types of ways to circulate?
Yes. We finished? And so the final atmosphere temperature is? Oh, that's weird. I say we say weird. Because if you play like in any way, if you play it, it should finish with the same temperature at the end. So there is something either missing in the card, or maybe like a small change because of the, you know, like the logo and so on, or like
One card is with breathing. So is there a difference if we take this from the landed part of the ocean part?
Oh, but it's like decoration, maybe it's really carbon green, but carbon means then pass it on to the yeah, that's where maybe. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's going to have it from the land directly to the atmosphere. That's why it moves more, and then you've got. Yeah, you put like either one in the atmosphere. So it should be for the atmosphere, and then pass into the ocean or in the atmosphere. And I think it's better if it goes to the atmosphere. Yeah, I haven't played for a long time, so now I'm seeing like there are like some mistakes. No, sorry about that. No, but it's not good to learn some mistakes. I'm going to write that down. Okay, so now what you can do is go back to your normal with the first step. Let's say we found out that you went back to 15 degrees. Yes. Yeah. So if you like putting all of them from land animals to atmosphere, you would have been back to 50. Like, that's the idea. The idea is like, either way you draw the cards, if you shuffle them like any ways, you will, like the temperature will vary, but then from the starting point to the end point, you have the same temperature. Because it's like a natural cycle, and that's what we call like a dynamic equilibrium. So it's a good way to express it to students that even if it's moving all the time, in average, you always have the same constant number of carbon everywhere. And therefore, there is an equilibrium. And now, if you add the yellow cards, and you play again the game very quickly, and you shuffle everything, then you'll see the answer. So now we say we've got human activities which are in place. And human activities are changing a bit the game. I'll say to everyone as well. There is one card which is a bit weird. This one doesn't change that. So it's just like this is like a link to the frequency of this move. So that in the version there is only one card because it's very rare. But then outgassing or respiration is more. And the respiration is typically only from land. Not from the ocean. Like from here or from here, respiration from here. It should be only from here. Even if the card is called into the atmosphere or the ocean, then let's do only atmosphere. Yeah, respiration is in the ocean also. But then, usually it should work. The it works very well, so that's why we want to change that to say like only from land Okay, and the temperature change? Yeah. And at the end it's warmer? Yeah. And you played all the time or only like
I understand it's important to use more.
Yeah. But I think we know when you start like I need to work a bit on the game. Usually it works, but I think you could have an ego or something very well. Because the aim of it is like if you play all the cards, you got changes in the atmospheric composition. Every now and then you got more or less, and then temperature changes. But by the regulation of the game, at the end you should have the same temperature at the beginning. So it's a natural, what we call natural equilibrium, and that's the way carbon cycle works without fossil fuel. So it's like always moving, and then temperature either it moves a bit. Yeah, almost the same, but then it should be 15 degrees at the end. And that's why I'm a bit confused because they were like less in here and you got more in here. And I think because one of the cards is not
No,
clear.
actually we just changed. These all are one. That's why the visualization is.
Yeah, right. So maybe that's why we're all a bit confused.
Yes.
We've got like
Yes.
7 here, and that's good. You've got 7 at the end.
Yes.
And you started with 7.
Yes, we started with 7.
Yeah, but at the end it's 15.
Yes.
We worked.
But
Ah,
this
well,
is
it's-
maybe it's good to have them in same color or
Yeah.
different colors. So it makes it
But the mom should like visualize better because this one is like a roof, but it's like.
Yeah.
Actually, it's good to see that from soil is going to atmosphere, so it goes to where it goes, then it's more visualized.
I think it's good, but I think what we can find better to have like only one tile.
Yeah, one line, but different colors.
Yeah, but maybe having like as we did like different colors for like 6, 10, and 1, but then having here a stuff to change from 5 to 1 if needed, or 10 to 5, and, you know.
Maybe it's easier with like all these.
Yeah, because here stuff if we have like for instance for the ocean you have to move 1. Then how do you do if you only want like from 5? If you got like with the
Maybe it's
poole klassi või huvigrupp.
because like it's a drawback. If you decide to have like only colors of 1, then in your board that would be
MEIE siis nagu, et see, mida see rühm ütleb, siis kas tõstavad või
the size of
yeah.
I think it's good to see that the soil is going where.
Yeah. The other thing the number of clouds are proportional to like the frequency of the movement. So you've got way more movement here,
But then you can see they are connected as well without this.
So yeah, maybe some already seeds.
Or maybe it's good to start with already something. And when you read, you have to also add arrows.
Yeah, you can do the first phase of like speeding up, like you draw the first phase, draw cards, it's like okay, then
Just round, just
like yeah.
So you have piles of different things and then you add from each color.
Millal valimegi sellised lahendusele?
Yeah, that's good. And then you get different colors. Then the other part of the game is like once you've got used up, you add the yellow one. And I don't know if we're going to have time to do it, but the aim is to shuffle it. Play again very quickly. And because at some point, at some point you have a yellow card coming up. And then you've got and then you have like a card about agriculture. Agriculture puts you resources to produce food. This adds carbon to the atmosphere. So you take one fossil fuel to the atmosphere. And then at the end, you've got 6 of them, and they're all but then reforestation, you can also have like positive ones. Reforestation, so it means you've got one more from here to here. But then energy, you use fossil fuels. You've got one from here as well. Transportation the same, industry the same, deforestation is these ones. So at the end, you've got 5 more here. So you've got increased temperature there. And so it's like representation of like how it works for an equilibrium and how it works in human activity around. So it's very visual. So yeah, I'm sorry with the ego, it was a mess, but the game usually just works smoothly. Did it work? Not really. Yes. So what did you find out?
That we have like a -degree already.
Oh wow! So it's like, did you have the blue cap, right? Yes. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's weird. maybe one of the cards we get it wrong from.
Many cards repeat.
Yeah, but it's normal. Yeah, I mean, in the other groups they were like equal. They were like playing. Temperature change to atmosphere loss, and then gain, and then loss and gain. But at the end, they were 50 minutes. And that works for the both groups. So I think maybe some of the cards you put in
This game is designed for what class?
for like middle school.
5, 6, 7 class?
Yeah, like 12 years old So yeah, usually what happens is like if you only the blue card, you have circulation and at the end you got 7 at first and then you have 7 at the end here. So maybe because of the legal we change it and it's like very messy, I'm sorry about that. But usually it should be equal, and that represents what we call a dynamic equilibrium. The fact that there are movement in the carbon cycle, so at the end it's an equilibrium. So it's like in the system it's moving all the time, but then in average it's got the same amount in the atmosphere. So then when we put the yellow card, it's adding what the human activities are changing in the carbon cycle. And that is adding that line. So you've got 3 or 4 carbons that are add carbon from here, there's 1 carbon which is deforestation, so we lose 1 carbon here, makes sense. But there is 1 positive carbon which is reforestation. And then what's going on here, you've got 4 more, I think, little coils, so therefore temperature increases. And that's an illustration of how carbon cycles, because of human activity, is different. So it should work like that. You know, I think it's because of the legal exchange. Did it work?
Yes.
Okay, cool. That's reassuring. Because suddenly it didn't work there and it worked now. And it works as well here. Cool. Yes. 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 No. Well, it's only like, yeah, ocean, so like the carbon that is dissolved in the ocean is captured by either the shells or either the algae in the ocean. Yeah. finish, I can show very quickly. To go with the game, if you want in the activity or to work with the students, just to understand the different, like how the different reservoirs are like moving from one to the other. We've got a little animation online that is very simple, and you have all the different processes from photosynthesis, outgassing, and so on. It's a bit different from the game. Some of the arrows are a bit different because for the game it was easier to just focus on like some specificity. But it's a good way to explore with the students on just like you know, like homeworking or just document analysis, the differences between the different reservoirs and how we come from one to another. And then you've got, as in the game it should be, and two groups were okay with that and the other no. And I think because of the Lego, I'm very sorry, I messed up the game because of the Lego and I came with other options. But the aim of the game in the first phase is to explore how it works during natural carbon cycle before human activities occurred as much since the Industrial Revolution. So the idea is to play the game without thinking more with this little arrow of temperature in the thermometer and to see is it moving or not. It moves during the game because there is more CO2 in the atmosphere sometimes, less in the atmosphere because it's going to the ocean and so on. It's like always moving. You've got the little LEGO always moving, and this temperature moves and moves and moves. But when you finish the game, you should all go back to normal, and in the atmosphere, you will have the initial amount coming back. And no matter the order of the cards you're playing. And that's how we represent a dynamic equilibrium. The fact that it's equilibrate at the end, it's a cycle, always circulating, and if you take it any time, you'll have the same amount of temperature apparently, but very quickly there are like changes. But in the reality, all the photosynthesis goes very quickly, but some other aspect goes very slowly. And that's why as well, in the game, you've got very few cards for very slow processes, such as erosion, versus way more cards for very fast processing, such as fermentation, respiration, or photosynthesis. Okay? And yeah, we designed the game for understanding by playing that it's an equilibrium. And you can explain with the students that, yeah, at the end, if it's a normal cycle, with all of those, you know, the amount of CO2 that is close to the reality and the changes that are close to how it works in time, it should be at the same at the beginning. But then you add different aspects. Here in the online animation, we talk about agriculture. So we remove agriculture, we talk about deforestation. So we remove one CO2 from the biosphere directly to the atmosphere, and all of the fossil fuel that are going out in the atmosphere. So by adding the 5 or 6 cards that are yellow, you come into how human activities are changing a bit this dynamic equilibrium. But it's on a very, very human life time scale, because we're talking about how come we change the fossil fuel. But then if we talk about this carbon cycle in a very, very, very long time scale, then we would have maybe reached an equilibrium at some point, because all of the fossil fuel, all of the biosphere might come into fossil resources at some point. But it's a very slow process, and that occurs under certain conditions during the Carboniferous or the Jurassic in the history of planet Earth. And therefore, we consider that it's minimal compared to how come human activities are forcing the release of this carbon in the atmosphere by burning the fossil fuels, for instance. And you see that in conclusion here, because of entropic flows, we have a increase of the temperature due to increase of the carbon in the atmosphere. And here in the multimedia animation, which is a bit more for like all the students, I guess, you have all the figures as well, and you can work with them in terms of how many billion tons we have in the atmosphere, and how come now we add more and more billion tons in the atmosphere. So you can start also to play with figures, and therefore you can play with how much ton of CO2 we have in the atmosphere. Okay? So I'm sorry for the one who were a bit messy with the game, and you can maybe, I mean, you have the card and so on, so you can play again at some point if you want. And if you got any feedback on that, I'm very happy to have it. And I'll think more about how to make it, especially with the cons. Maybe we can make them easier with colors and so on. So I'll take some feedbacks at the end, and then we can think, especially for the translation of the book, to have it like a bit better in that way. So in this carbon cycle animation, and if you work on that, then you touch something that is quite interesting, is that how many carbon is in the atmosphere. Then what kind of question you can ask your students? Because now we all know that carbon is in the atmosphere, it's causing climate change, so we saw that at first. Greenhouse effect is due to carbon in the atmosphere. Now we know that carbon circulates between different reservoirs, but human activities are causing an increase of carbon in the atmosphere because of release from fossil fuel, but also decrease of forests, for instance. So now to your student, what type of activity you can propose maybe? Or what kind of question they might have at the end. Maybe they will ask like, well, why are we doing that? Or like, am I actually inducing more CO2 in the atmosphere, right? So you can start to work on what we call the carbon footprint, you know?
No, so the question should be like, how can us or humans can reduce our impact on the CO2 that goes into the earth?
Exactly. Yeah, that's you can definitely go. That's the objective, I would say. But then, how come you can answer the question of like, what solution can I have? How can I reduce my carbon footprint without knowing your carbon footprint? So one first step would be to have a look at what are the causes and how society and how humans, or how my family and how in the group I am inducing more carbon, and then play on, oh, maybe if I do that, I reduce my impact. So if we've got a bit of time, we can maybe play another activity that we developed. I don't know if you've got your phone, and usually it works on phones. It's a carbon footprint little calculator that is developed by the OC, so it's in English. I'll try to make it. I haven't checked, I did it this morning, so I haven't checked if it works.
It works.
Ah, cool. Oh, don't know if I might. It's a text. No? Does it go directly to the website?
Yeah.
Oh, never mind. I have to copy it. So I said.
There's a difference with
So I think you have to
I
put
scan camera.
okay. Maybe you have to put your screen in
Zoom is in a part.
So first you choose where you live, and you see down. So I choose I live in Europe, and you see down there is a little like amount of CO2 that you produce, and then you answer the questions. Yes. Sorry? Yeah, like sheep, sorry. Yeah. Oh yeah, like looking at the questions around them. Yeah, it's shit.
aga sealt autost ta ei paku et ma saaks näidata. Alguses ta näitab, kus see siget aga mul on foodis seal on üks täpselt. Vaata, kui see liigub selle peal mõõdada, need on
see regioon teab selle peal lõpp.
see liigub mul on foodis üks tühjaks. See on tarvik näha.
See on kooli jaoks. See on kooli MEIE jama.
So you've got
Kas võiks olla tegelikult, ma teen ühte hästi ja teist halvasti. Aga ma võin lähendada.
Okay, so have you done it? So who wants to share its carbon footprint?
Share like how much it was?
Yeah.
4,000.
Wow, that's good. I did it mine, but very, I didn't even look at the question, so it's all wrong. Because I wanted to show you that, but okay, we've got 4 here.
4.5, 7.0.
Okay. Okay. You don't have to, if you don't want to, but how do you find doing it? Were you surprised? No? And you see that here the little bar here, which is the average globally, but also what we should try to stick under to reach the Paris Agreement, which are trying to limit the increase of 2 degrees at the end of the century, in average. And yeah, depending, but you saw there are like so many different questions about what's happening in the house, transportation, food, or consumption, a lot about the electronic devices and so on. So it's very interesting with the children because it just, you know, tell about their own habits, especially teenagers. But then it can be tricky because some of the habits are not in the hands of the children. It's all about, like, you know, parents and so on. So it's a good activity also to, you know, ask questions and so on. But you have to be careful not to be like, oh, you should not do that, you should not do that. Which is not the case. It's more about like, what's your habits? But then it makes you reflect on maybe if I have chosen that, you can go back in time and you can choose another one and you see if it has a difference or not. But you see here, then the percentage of each of the, what was the biggest one for you in here, in this little camembert?
Infrastructure.
Always. Yes. So infrastructure is a big one, and that's where we see that an important aspect is the collective and the political aspect. Because a lot of stuff has to be done with the way transport is made locally, the way hospital, the way the energy, if the energy plan is more sustainable in a country compared to another. And all the figures are based on like proper analysis from scientists. You can find on the website there is sources, and so you can find the sources. And remember, at first you have to choose which part of the world you are living actually. So it's an average, but you see that if you choose another part, will it work? Oh, it's rather, sorry. Yeah. If you're choosing another part, then there is already a little amount or big amount. And that's because of the average amount of consumption and amount of emission of one continent compared to another. So if you come from America, you've got very big. So it's pretty much average, but it does give an idea of a kind of like fatality of society where I live is much more producing because of its good and so on. And we can discuss it. It's not like clear rock and clear water. It's more about like having an idea of, okay, there is some injustice and climate justice, and the fact that some countries are contributing more in average than others, but they're not necessarily the one that are impacted more by climate change. But I find the activity quite interesting as well to question with the students all of the aspects. And to go on with that type of climate justice, you can have a look at the map at the end, which is like an average for each continent, and you've got an average, very different one. But it's always because you've got some countries that are like putting up, for instance, Qatar is putting up a lot in Middle East, where the demand is very low. And same in Oceania with Australia, which releases a lot of greenhouse gases because of mining, because of coal production. So it's always driven by that. But then, what was the second one you had? So infrastructure is something we can't really do anything about it. But I think as a student, as a family, on our daily basis. But we can definitely do a lot by voting, by doing some politics locally, by going to local community agreement to change a bit, like locally, but also collectively, to engage into positive action, to lobbying, like citizen lobbying in Brussels or in our country to make changes. And also, as a teacher, you can make changes in the institution. So there are a lot of like levers to try to work on what we call here infrastructures, but which is more driven by collective laws and collective actions. And we always think, oh yeah, it's not our hands, so why should I do efforts? Because they're like, you know, big companies, or nationally it has to be national efforts. But there are still like, you know, voting, there's still a lot of like levels of citizens that makes changes. But then, what were your second, you know, number here? Food? Housing. Food and housing. Yeah, and I guess it depends on the people, it depends on the places as well. Housing is very much driven by heating in a lot of countries, in France as well, but also by refreshing your houses in a lot of other countries, and by using aircon. You may have also high. We always think, okay, heating is very good. It's a very, you know, important impact. Has very important impact. In France, at the moment, there is a huge call for isolation. Houses are very bad isolated, so we need to renovate. There's a huge call for renovation in France. It's very political, but yeah, it's getting there. There's some help from government to renovate your home and so on, to reduce the fact that you're losing a lot of heat during winter when you heat up and your window and everything is not very sealed well. So that's one aspect that we can do collectively to reduce housing. But then, yeah, in a lot of countries, and in France now, like south part of France, there are more and more people putting aircon to reduce the heat during summer, and that has huge impact on climate change as well. So it's like a solution for adapting our lifestyle to an impact of climate change, which is heat waves and increase of temperature. But this is a solution of adaptation, which has negative impact in terms of mitigation, because it's adding more into the problem. But by renovating houses, it helps as well to reduce the impact of heat. The same thing, just protect inside the heat or the freshness during summer. Then you're talking about transportation and food. How about food? Do you know why you've got some impact when you eat that, or why you got some impact when you eat that? Because housing, I think, it's kind of like easy to explain. Well, you need to talk about energy, you need to talk about when you burn fuel to get like a heat in winter and so on. But then, how do you explain why you've got differences and why your impact, what is actually the impact of food in carbon footprint?
It has to do with the things you eat.
Yes.
Do you eat dairy, or do you eat what kind of meat do you eat?
Yes.
And all that choices.
Yes. So what I propose to you now is to look a bit more into the food aspect. And so we developed another game. Again, this morning is like all about games, okay? But it's to show you different ways. And there is two ways of doing it. I propose we do it collectively, but it's also in cards. And they've been printed out and so on, but they are not two-sided, so we have to glue them. I can help to do that. But there is the online version. So all the things we do, not this one is only online, but the game you had is like a game like that, and then there's an online version. And for this game, they both cards are online versions. And we can do together the online version, and I think it's a good way to do it. It's either way you do it by group with your students, or you do it individually. Okay, so it's a game about the environmental footprint of our alimentation. And we can choose at first which of the three different aspects we want to look at. Either the carbon footprint, how much equivalent of CO2 is released in the atmosphere when you produce one element, one food item, or the water used, or the land used. And you can choose a level of difficulty, which is more the number of cards you may have in your deck. If you choose easy, you've got less, and hard, you've got more. So just we go with carbon footprint, and we choose easy. It's not that easy yet. And here, so the game design is the following. You've got one card that is already up on the table or on the screen here. And you see here, there is the amount of CO2, or equivalent CO2. We put equivalent CO2, I don't know if you remember yesterday we saw different warming power of, double warming power of different greenhouse gases. Methane has a higher warming power than CO2, for instance. But when we do carbon footprints, usually what we do is that we translate the amount of methane, for instance, released into how it would be if it was CO2. So it's always CO2 equivalent, equivalent. So we work from like a big study from the journal Science, where they study a lot of different food that was produced on the planet, and they make an average. They make an average with like calculation and so on. And then how we did it as well to end up with that figure. So it's like from this paper, and we choose only one paper. That was important because they use the same methodology. And the other thing which is hard to get when you do carbon footprint, because there was always different methodology, and there was always like, oh no, we didn't take that into account. It's a very hard way of doing it. So if we want to compare it, and I think for me, the best thing we can do, and maybe the only thing we can do with carbon footprint is comparison. Before that, we were comparing different countries. We can compare what if I do that compared to what if I do that, because it's clearer to have comparison rather than like just one figure. What does it mean? What does 0.4 kilogram of CO2 means? Nothing to no one, right? So you just need the number, and you just need one calculation to have it. But then by using the same source, scientific source, you're sure that they are comparable. So we choose to use that first source, and then we choose to use the recommendation of the World Organization of Health for the amount we take of each of the food for normal, like average diet. For instance, For this one, C for like olive oil, or any of the oils, is like 10 milliliters. So it's like a specific amount. Okay, so that's just for the wall. Then, so you've got one item, and that's the number of CO2 that is emitted. Then you have to choose. You see there is no number here of the CO2 emitted, and you have to choose where you put it. If you put it there before, it means you think that to produce that amount of oil, you will emit less CO2 than to produce that amount of coffee. If you think it's more, you put it there. Okay? So what do you think? Who thinks it's more than coffee? Less? Let's try. Put it here. Yes, it's less. How about groundnuts? This is cacahuete. You can be in the middle. Less than that, middle, or right? Middle. Yes! Oh, you good. Sugar beetroot. Well, yeah, white sugar from beetroot. From beet. Okay. No. It's less than olive oil. And then what happens? You put it back to, it will come back later. So you put it back in the game. If you play with the cards, you put it back in the game. Okay, poultry meat.
Groundnuts and coffee?
Yeah, that's right. No, it's more than coffee. Okay, back in here. Lemon. Yes, well, the same as olive oil. Rice. Or more than coffee? A bit less than coffee. Eggs. More than coffee?
Yes.
Oh, no. It's less than coffee. So farm crustaceans. Less than coffee? Oh, wow. Carrot.
Less than olive oil.
Less than olive oil. Ah, no, just a bit more like groundnuts. Okay, where was that one?
Less than olive oil.
Yes, that one.
More than coffee.
Was it? Just less than coffee, actually. Oh, no, sorry, way more. Rice was...
Less than coffee.
Ah, okay, then the one that was this. Okay, eggs, more than coffee.
No. It was less than rice.
Oh, less than rice. Oh, bad. Come back. So this one was more. Okay, carrot was like here. And poultry was more than coffee?
Less than.
Here. And finally eggs. More than rice?
Less than. It was like 29.
Ah, yeah. So fair. That's good. So you see that by doing that, you compare whatever you eat, and you have to guesstimate. You have to say, okay, maybe it's more, maybe it's less, and so on. Are you surprised? Oh, you already had. What I find interesting is that the eggs are still big, but not as big as poultry, but then you see crustaceans are very big. And when you see the results, then you got all the carbs, I think. Oh no, this was, but then if you got all the cards to play, a good way to also play it is to make that you can't do with the online animation, but you can do with the cards, is to just choose, because then you got categories. For instance, if you choose only to look, and for me the most interesting is to look only at the protein ones. So protein would be, oh yeah.
Do you have to teamwork?
Yeah, but I think because they're not currently playing. Yeah, sorry. But I just want to present how we could. Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to find. Oh yeah. So for me, a good way to play it maybe is to have a look at only, for instance, the protein. So you can either play with a full deck with your students, but then it's even more didactic because with the full deck you've got a bit of everything. You've got like carbohydrates, then you've got like oils, then you've got like stimulants like chocolate and coffee, then you've got meat and so on. But if you really want to specifically work on one aspect, then I suggest maybe working on vegetarian versus non-vegetarian, or like the impact of meat consumption. Then you can just bring all the protein intake. So in that case, I take the crustacean, the lamb, pork, cheese, egg, tofu, beef, fish, for instance. And I've got all of the, type of protein that you can have. And I think we've got also some lentils, or maybe not. And you can play the same with like fruits or vegetables and so on. But I think the more impactful would be the one about meat and there. Or you can make categories and so on, and you can use that into an activity about nutrition, about alimentation, and then have that component about the climate change on top of it. And if you do that, then you can compare, and it's easier to play because you've got less cards actually. It's quite a big deck actually. You've got all of them. But yeah, I think it's a good entry, either to work from, you do like a session about your carbon footprint and then you want to focus more on one aspect, which is food, or you work with the students about alimentation, what do we eat and so on, and then you've got just like a little add-on activity on climate change and food. And also you can choose something that is more relevant to Estonia, and you can choose like more elements that are relevant to here, and do the game as well. So it's more like inspiration if you want to use that game to the children. But again, I think that's the best way to do carbon footprint is by comparing different stuff. Then you got all of them. But yeah, so just you've got a bit of time, and you can play with only the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cards about protein. Okay, I've got it sorted out for someone if you want. I got them here if you want. Just the basic ones. And then so there are like two options of the game as well. You can first do that, like just play with the protein, but then you can do like an ideal meal. You can ask your students what would you like to eat as like a full meal, and then they choose their alimentation, and then you compare in the different group how much CO2 they are emitting, and then trying to make a meal that is like enjoyable, but then with less CO2. You can also play with that, and if you want, as a group, you can propose to me like a nice recipe and calculate your carbon footprint. Or you can make a traditional Estonian dish if the alimentation are here, and calculate the carbon footprint of it. And chicken pasta. Okay, and then you calculate it. Oh, this looks nice. No one's speaking beef.
Because I know it's high, but
Yeah, no.
I can.
Is it as high? Beef is high. Beef is like 8. I think it's higher. Nah, yeah, it's higher than Yes. Yeah, that's what I was saying, like comparing, it's better to compare like what is in the same type of alimentation. So for instance, if you compare protein, you've got 100 of protein intake from the fish or from the poultry or the crustacean or the pork. But then it's harder to compare it to meals or vegetables, so it's better to do categories. So the game, the basic game is like just to have an idea and fun. But then for me it's better to make categories and then compare categories. And the best category for me is to work on protein intake. then you can talk about vegetarian and so on. Or you can also make what they do in the other group is to make your ideal meal and then calculate your fructose. So it's you know, from the card you can do a lot, but then the basic of the cards is, yeah, it's weird because you can't really compare medicinal same amount and so on. So it's more like to compare two categories. And also like the figures can be a bit like weird sometimes. And I remember I was playing with people in Mexico, and they were like, oh, and also because maize here, like corn, it's nothing. We all have it in our garden, so why is it so high? Because it's an average on the planet. But then there are like so many specificities in different countries. And that's also a discussion about the transportation behind it. If it's like occurring like CO2.
Tiimiga mõned. Siin on tore, et sa tõmbad koobilisest. See on just see, et sa saad oma või siis võtad ainult mitte seda teeksida on päris keeruline. Sest võtame järgmise päeva kiiresti korduvalt ära jagama kategooriate vahel, siis see pool tundi kulus. See ainuke tõmbus on seesama põhimõtteliselt. Paned punase nooli või siis teisele et sa panedki rohelist või lõpuks sa nii käpikas seda oliivi kasavad käime ja võisin palju
So who can tell me if you did it, who can tell me the ideal dish and how much does it cost? Cost or like
tegelikult siin oli viidatud
So are you good with those cards? Yes, right. So who wants to make me dream with food? I think you're the only group who worked on the meal, right? Because although I are exploring other dimensions of the game, I think. But yeah, so.
What?
Did you calculate the?
I have chicken pasta that's 157
kilo.
1.1. Land use or what are we calculating?
CO2.
Mine was 0.3.
Almost.
And that's increasing?
Yeah.
That's increasing?
No, that's not increasing.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, can we just like listen because they did a competition, like a food competition. They had a lot of ingredients in the form of paper cards, as you had as well. But they choose to do like their own meal, and the idea is to eat like approximately the same amount of like protein and carbohydrate and so on, but to see if you've got like an impact or not on the planet, but you can also play on the impact on your health. Or what you like. So yeah, can you present to us the recipe and just the amount of CO2?
I have a chicken pasta here. And it's carrots, wheat, like pasta.
Yeah.
Then poultry and cheese, and it's 1.5.
Okay. Is it good?
I don't know.
And then like, is it tasty?
Yeah, it's tasty. I eat it a lot, so maybe it's okay as it's low, I think.
Yeah, okay.
No, it's pasta.
Okay, no eggs in pasta. Okay. So what did you have for lunch?
I had fish with vegetables, like peas, maize, olive oil, and leeks.
Okay.
And it was 1.2.
Okay, quite similar then. Then.
I have a rice with tofu, broccoli, and nuts, and then I have dessert, berries, and it was 0.34 today.
Wow.
And this is very realistic. This is what I eat.
Okay.
Just I had like onions or garlic.
Yeah. So lower because there is no meat. I mean, there is like a soy from the tofu for protein, but there is no meat for protein. And then?
I killed the planet because I eat lamb with potatoes and 3.5 kilograms meat.
Okay. So we see that for the same amount of food, because it was always 100 gram for the protein intake, for instance, and then vegetables, same amount of thing, you've got different CO2 released in the atmosphere. And it's interesting for the children as well to question that and to compare to each other, like not to compare to say, oh, I'm bad, you're good, but more to have like different perspectives. And the idea behind it is not to say everything is bad, everything is good, it's like diversification, and like maybe reducing a bit meat to like enhance more. And all of that comes as well with habits and discoveries. And I think for me, like food is a very good tool to trigger children and to make them like realize how they can have an impact and how they can act. Okay? And so do you know why there is such a big impact or low impact of your food? So we're talking about how come the beef is big because it's releasing methane by burping, I remember. We were discussing that yesterday. But is that the only... Is that the only reason? Sorry, I'm trying to... Yeah, here we are. When we look at food, what are we looking at? We're looking at the way we produce food, right? But is that the only thing? Because for the majority of us, and especially for the majority of the children, again, maybe I'm biased, but in France, it's how it works. We go to the supermarket and we buy food, or we go to like the local market, or we go to the grocery store. So we make an effort of like going somewhere, so we move somewhere to get the food out from there. But or if we are lucky and we live in the countryside, we can have like our own vegetables that are grown in our gardens, or even we can live in a farm and then we've got our own food from the farm. But then for the majority of the children, and I work a lot with like children near Paris, there is no farm in Paris actually, and so children are used to go to the supermarket to get the food. And they get the food in like a box and so on. So the idea is to work with the children of like where does it come from and what's behind it. What's behind a food that you don't really know where it's coming from and how all the process that goes into the food that you got in your plate. That's what we call from fork to plate, or sorry, from field to fork. So basically, what are the different processes that we can like list with the kids when we think about like one product. And then what's interesting, we can draw the different, what we call the cycle of life of an aliment. And I can show you maybe one little video I made. So it's in French, so I can like double my voice of the video in English now. But to present a way to look at, oh, maybe there was a paper actually. To look at,
Do you need sound?
no, I guess I'll be speaking in French and I hate hearing my voice. So I'll be, oh, that's interesting. So I took an example of a very French standard food, which is camembert, like cheese, because we can't have like a, marks or like brands online. This is like a fake one. So to produce this cheese, how do we need it? First, there is a step, which is we need milk, and therefore, where the milk comes from is the cows. Okay? So we need a cow. For the cow, it's grass, usually, but also for industrial cheese, it eats more like soy or maize, and all of that. So that's the first step, which is production. But to get the food for the cow, we need to grow this food. So we need to grow maize, grass, and soy. And this is by using, for again, industrial cheese, using a lot of fertilizers into the field. And the fertilizers are a great emitter of nitrous oxide. So I put here. So the first, occurrence of like something going in the atmosphere. So in French we call it enranged fertilizers. But we also need space to grow that. And for instance, for bees, there's like very, iconic example of a lot well, a lot of deforestation in the Amazonia is due to planting soy to grow cattle. And therefore, by doing that, we cut the trees and we use, tractors or something that are emitting CO2, but also by cutting the trees, we reduce, as we saw it in the game, the intake of CO2 by photosynthesis. So this is the first, the first carbon that emitted in the atmosphere are behind what the cow is eating and how we make the cow functioning to get the milk is all of those, hidden aspects. And you can add to that, which I haven't added here because I didn't have space, but fertilizers, but also pesticides. And where do they come from? They always come from, for Europe, mainly from India or China. So there's transport to get fertilizer from India or China direct to France or Estonia to get the field fertilized and get the pesticide right, and all of that, also adding more and more and more pesticide and pollution. But then if we go back to our little cow, and if you cut the cow into 2 pieces, you can see what's going on inside, and actually what we call fermentation due to digestion of the cow, which is emitting a lot of CH4 methane in the atmosphere just by the fact that it's, so you see, I put it near the mouth, it's actually where it's going out. So yeah, now that we've got the cow, now that we know that to have a cow that is birthing methane but also producing milk, we need someone to get the milk. Again, we are in the process of industrial cheese. So we've got a company, like a milking, collecting company that goes from farms to farms to get the thing. And then you need actually fossil fuel to get your trucks running and driving from one farm to another. So you release CO2 in the atmosphere. Then you finally got that into a fabric where you store the milk and you transform it into your cheese. So that's the transformation part. And then once you've got your cheese done, you collect all the cheese. That's like another company going from one industry of cheese production in one part of France, say near the Alps. That's where we've got a lot of cows. But then you've got few what we call like big storage for any food that we'll release in any small supermarket everywhere in France. We've got only 5, I think, in France, big storage places. So basically, we've got trucks going everywhere on France territory to get from the production part to those gathering pools of all the goods, and then out from those gathering pools or hubs towards all the supermarkets. So you've got like this, like distribution part, which is very logistic. Like how do you collect one point to another one? And always you've got those trucks, because they, collect a good from here. You have to store it here, then it will dispatch in small places. You've got another truck, which can be a bit smaller, but still. And then finally, you've got the cheese in a supermarket, so you can go and collect it. That's what we call commercialization. You get your cheese, depends where you live, but if you live in the countryside or like a small suburban area, then you get your car to get your supermarket once a week. And therefore, you use sometimes electric cars, but like usually fuel cars, so you got CO2 release as well. And finally, you eat your cheese. Maybe some of it you don't eat it because consumption is not like, sometimes you got like waste, and then you got food waste, and then you put that in your bin, hopefully, and then you got either compost or either the bin will be somehow, sometimes, put it back into the system. So you've got a cycle. So that was it. So you see, this small table has a lot in it, because it has all of the processes are hidden behind one good. And I found it quite interesting to work on that one with the students, and there can be different ways to work on it with different products and so on. But having that in mind is quite interesting because it reveals what's hidden. You can do that with clothing as well. You can do that. That's what we call life cycle, and that's quite interesting to reveal the carbon footprint. It's more like pictorial than just figures, right? And what you can do as well is to compare that to other type of goods for the same thing. If you go, for instance, to a farm that's actually doing their own cheese, then, and if you go by bike to the farm, or you can try to find ways to go on with the students about how we can reduce, do we need all the steps, depending on where we shop. Maybe we're lucky and we can shop directly to the farm. So we don't need that, 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 and we go directly here. And then we reduce a bit the carbon footprint. So it's all about, by explaining, I guess, you get better idea of how you can act, rather than, or revealing here, rather than saying like, oh, you should not do that, and you should go and shop in the market. Maybe it's very like French. I don't know if that's related to what you live in Estonia. I'm sorry if not, but if it's something you feel like it can be similar at some point, yeah, I think it's a good angle as well to work with the students on that topic. Yes?
2 questions.
Yes.
How is possible that footprint of a milk was bigger than cheese?
Say again, sorry?
Footprint of the milk was bigger than cheese. And other question, how is possible that potatoes and bananas are equal? We are in Estonia, I think, I don't think.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah. So for the banana and potatoes, the thing I was saying is like all of those figures are coming from the same article that took like average of farming for all of those aspects, all of those products on the planet. So it's like an average for the banana production and the eating product of this product in average. So the figure like at the end is like that. So that's why it's weird. And same for the milk and the cheese. I think it depends as well, because it's an average, and there are like way more people eating, like drinking milk. Then you've got big farms, say in America or in India, that are like putting the average a bit higher. You know what I mean? So that's why this game's got like defaults, but that's the only way, and that's why I think the dynamic of the game is very good. And if you can find ways to make it like adapted to Estonia, I think it's even better. Because banana is a bit weird, and when I was doing the game in Mexico, they were like the opposite. Like, why, leek here we don't have leek, and they're very poor. But then maize is something we always eat. It's from my garden. Why is it so? So that's also the thing about climate change education. We talk about something that is global, but also very local. So it always is like, okay, we need a vision of a globally issue, but then how does it work locally? And to answer that question, I think that type of illustration is interesting because it can talk to local people. But then there is this like myth of, yes, the eating local is very important. And I think it's important, but to some extent. And I think the most important is actually if we are vegetarian or not, or if we eat meat or not, like beef meat or not. Because here is a figure from the same article where we took all of the data for this game. And you see here the land use change of farm, animal feed processing and transport in red, retail and packaging. And the red is very, very low everywhere compared to the farm, which is the bigger one. But saying that, when you go more into detail, then you can see for the same product, if you eat meat, for instance beef, then there is still differences between organic beef will be better for the environment anyways than farm beef coming from, I don't know, Argentina. But then, if you eat tofu coming from China, it's anyway better than the beef from Argentina. So it's always like where you put the lines. So it's an endless exploring tool, I guess. But yeah, I was very surprised because it was like always, yeah, it's better to eat local rather than like organic, or local rather than vegetarian. But then when you look at the figures, actually the more important, the farming aspect. Okay? So again, it's based on one study, which is a good study. Here you've got the data source. It's reducing food environmental impact through producers and consumers from science. And it has done this, I think, amazing job of trying every single food product and trying to find, like average. And to finish up on that note, I want to show you one last activity we've produced. That is looking at actually the diversity of field production. And I choose four different food production. So you've got tomatoes in red, you've got beef in black, you've got palm oil in blue, and you've got maize or corn in yellowish brown. So if we click to, which one do you want to see? You can see all of them actually. In each of the cases, there are three different dimensions of agriculture. For the tomato, for instance, I choose to focus on one particular place which is very emblematic. It's always like trying to make very emblematic, references for the children. And I choose a way to look at it from space at first, so it's satellite view, then plane view, then drone view, and then pedestrian view. And so here I'm in south of Spain, and I don't know if you notice here something quite white. If I go a bit further down, I see all of those little white things. Maybe it just rings a bell because it's called greenhouses. Maybe it's just a sign. But if you go down, you see those huge greenhouses. And if you go inside, you see fields and fields and fields of tomatoes. And this is a place in Spain called Almeria. And Almeria is also known as the Sea of Plastic. It's like this huge field, and you can see from space, which is like, that's the 20 kilometers wide thing. And they're producing a lot of tomatoes that we can have all year long, all Europe. And so that's how they produce it. It's very, industrial food, like pizza or any industrial food, because it's cheaper, so we'll go for that. Then we can explore what's happening in here, which is north from Tunisia, and you see there is no clear aspect. It's all like green and different aspects, but then plan view you can see a bit more, little fields. And in the little fields, you see at some points like plain fields, so there is no plastic field house. It's also like a bit hotter, but not that hot. It's actually the same, quite the same as in South Spain. And then you see it's like plain field tomato. So it's like, and it's like a specific place in Tunisia called Cap Bon, and they're like very like traditional familial tomato growth, but it's like industrial as well. It's like they sell it. It's like, and they do a lot of like dry tomato. And then the last one we can look at is so it's in Russia, the collective gardens. So you see it's near, I can't remember which city, but they have the city here, and then we can focus on this part here, which are the little collective gardens. And so it's more like familial agriculture, where you've got all of the different vegetables, and you've got tomato, of course. So just to show you like the different things from big thing to more like local thing. And if you do the same for beef, for instance, or corn is quite fun as well. So you see that's a satellite view in Kansas, I think, in the US. And you can see that it's quite pixelized, isn't it? Maybe the picture is a bit weird. Maybe we've got something wrong with the picture. But then if we go down and down, we see those giant, what we call crop cycles. Crop cycles. And they are, filled with like water and with fertilizers and so on. And that's like giant field of corn. That's a way to produce corn. Then if you go to Mexico, you see there is more of a forest. Then at some point you'll see little fields. Then drone view is like very different little fields. And then, yeah, they're like filled with irrigation, so it's like a bit of, it's also very manual, but you've got also use of a bit of technology, but it's like a smaller scale. And then finally, for another way to produce corn, you can go to the Amazonian forest, and you can see it's only the forest, and here you can see a bit of smoke. And there are this like way of doing agriculture, which is ancestral way, which is like slash and burn, and the way of like just having a small patch of the forest that is like burned at some point, and then they grow different plants, and it's like all the plants are maize and cassava and corn and what do you call that? Beans. And they do it like, it's a bit like agroforestry. So they do it in the
companion plant?
Yeah, companion planting. There's like a Three Sisters story, which is like with corn, calabaza, so like what do you call the cucurbitacea, slash, and beans. And they grow together because the corn is making the stick, and they grow and they protect us all the plants. Which is one way again to do that. And then for the beef, we've got in Uruguay, so the same forest, a bit further south. And you can see from space that this forest got a little square here. And if you go down, there are actually very, very large squares, like 2 kilometers apart from that. And that's just a big field where you've got like big pounds, but otherwise just like, no forest anymore. And then you've got beef everywhere. So that's one way to do cattle in Paraguay, for instance. And then if you go to France, in this part of France we've got still small fields. It's like the last region where we've got small fields with trees a bit everywhere. And you see that it's a type of field, and that's a cow here. So it's a bit smaller. And you got cows and like trees and so on. Again, there are like a lot of diversity in terms of the climate and so on, so you can't do the same thing. For instance, here we are near the desert in Burkina Faso. In Burkina Faso, you've got nothing but little patches of vegetation, and therefore the agriculture is very different. And you've got little cattle that are very much endangered because of climate change and so on. So you've got either like example of production that affect climate change. So there's a big circle in Kansas. They are bad, let's say, for climate. But you're also like example of production that are very susceptible, that are very endangered by climate change. So agriculture is pretty much in the middle, either or always has an impact on climate change, and also is very impacted by climate change. So it's interesting as well to just show that, and I found it like showing it from the satellite view is quite impactful because you can see how agriculture is changing as well the dimension, the landscape. So that's in Borneo, in Malaysia, and you see here's that's a forest, and here's a bit of a different forest. Very, aligned forest. Very, very aligned forest. And you see it's like trees. And that's a way to do palm trees, to do palm oil. It's actually, how a lot of palm oil is used in globalized industries, such as like Nutella and all of that, it's there is like a lot of questions around palm oil coming from there. But there are like different ways to do it. For instance, in Benin, same, you see mainly forests, but then you've got fields and little paths, and you see that you've got little farms, a bit like in France before. And that's where you've got palm oil coming from family businesses, but it's a business. So it's in between, and then finally you got more like agroforestry in Sri Lanka, which is like pine forest in the mountain. You got nothing but forest, you can't even see, maybe that's a palm tree, maybe not. Because basically you've got this type of, you know, you've got like a tea tree here, palm here, and banana palm here, that's like companioning again in agroforestry. So yeah, that was to show you how we can draw from your local food habits or your habits in general, and then towards like how agriculture is different in a different part of the planet, but also how this is linked to climate change. So I think we're good. It's almost 1 minute. It'll be one in 30 seconds now. And yeah, thank you so much for this morning. I hope it was not too much information. And I hope that it can be useful at some point in Estonia. And I think again, the main case is like, how can we build that from local to global? Together, like we are all here, or are we still waiting for?
But it's okay to start, I think.
Oh, okay.
Võiks hakkas tund.
Aga enne. But we can start.
Okay. Welcome. All right. So thank you for all of your attention since yesterday, and we have been working quite hard, I think, and it's good, about the comprehension of the greenhouse effect, and now a bit more about carbon footprint and how our society and ourselves can impact the climate. There are a lot more to do in terms of like the knowledge, scientific knowledge, and in the book there are like so many activities that you can do to explore more. There are activities to explore more like different aspects, for instance, photosynthesis. There are more activity on consumption with some games and so on. So I'll let you discover a bit more about one of the in Estonian or even in English if you're interested. You can, I can show you a bit at some point after the session the book. But what I wanted to do now, it's more something that is less about science, but more about how we can talk about emotions, about climate change with students, or emotion in general, but specifically on climate change. And it comes from one of the activity, a bit adaptive. So I propose we do the activity first, and after I'll do like a small scientific background on all this topic. And we can discuss after how we can, in classroom or even like as a society, find solutions. but I found it interesting to start with how do we feel, and because it's not something that is very common in France, at least, to work about emotion and what the students really want and can do. So yeah, let's do it. You've got all some cards in front of you, so you should have the same card as the one here. And so you've got a deck for each of you of the cards. So here is the rules of the activity. First, there will be a phase of individual thinking. So you all think individually for 5 minutes, in silence if possible, and you're going to choose 3 emotions that you can feel when you think about climate change, when you talk about climate change. What does it represent to you? How do you express your feeling and so on? So you can choose 3 of them. If you're unsure, if there is something that you want, say that it's not here, you can write it down, you can modify the card and so on. But the idea is to have like this, panel of emotions, and you can see they are all like positive, negative, neutral. They are all either like a very strong or less strong emotion, and they are like more feeling or more. It's a mix of different, level of emotion. They can be very cognitive or more like instinctive. And the first step that we can do together, let me know if you want to, spend time to have a look together and translate it, or just do that on your own. But with the students, it's interesting to start just by describing different emotions, because some of them, they can be a bit different. So we use here emotions that are quite often picked, specifically in research, in psychology research, when they work on eco-anxiety, for instance. So that's the type of emotion they ask the student or participants to the study to answer. But again, that can be adapted as well to the context. So I suggest we play with this first. So the first phase is like individual, then it will be by groups. I'm going to explain again. And finally, we're all going to be together. Okay? So now I'll leave you like, say, 3 or 5 minutes to just have a think. If you want, you can write down as well why you choose this emotion. So during the second phase in group, you're going to present to the others why you choose that emotion, the reason, and if you want to develop a bit more. So you can use paper to help you out. And now I stop talking. Sorry? Only 3.
Ei, ma vaatasin.
I'll leave you 1 more minute, and if you're done, just try not to talk if someone still needs to think about it. Yeah, with the colors.
Selline nagu leetrid oleks lastud.
Okay, are you all good? You got your 3 cards? Okay, so now I gave in each of the group 4 pens of different colors. Okay? So now you can choose one of the pen, which is one of the color. There's one blue, one pink, one brown, and one orange. If you group of 2, just pick one. And I've got 4 different paper here, which are 4 different groups, and you can recognize one of the color, right? So if you are pen blue, then you go in group blue. If you're pen brown, you go in group brown, and pink in group pink, and yeah, brown is this one, in group 1. Okay? So you can pick the page of the group, and then now for 20 minutes, or even 25 minutes, so let's say at 2:30, we gather back here. So it means per group you've got around 25 minutes, 20 minutes to go in the group, and you find a place, maybe outside is good, and then you discuss one by one. You say, okay, I choose this emotion, why, and try to be like, concise, but also to listen to each other, and if a reaction comes, if there is discussion, then follow the discussion. But please have time, all of you, to express your emotion, why you choose that, and then someone take the time in each of the groups, so like timekeeper, and then you come back here and we gather all the emotions together. Okay? Do you have any question? So there's nothing really to write down, it's more just talking. But if you want to write any like big reaction to remember and then to share it with the group, you can do that on the paper. Okay? Yeah, you can have the paper. And then find a spot, have someone to take the time. And we meet here at 2:30. And you don't have to talk together in English. Then I won't understand what you're doing.
Kus me lähme? We're going outside.
Yeah, I think outside is good.
We have to talk in English.
No.
kõik läheb
Või sinna gruppi sellele kirjutama. What do we do with this paper?
Just to gather together and then, if you have buried something that just came out, you want to write, you can write and share it after with the group, but there is nothing specifically to write down.
Okay.
vaata midagi pidi kirjutama, aga ei pidanud. See on siia siis üleval. Ja me jääme siia, me ei lähe kusagile.
Nimetage.
I've got 10 minutes. Yes. I'll let them work for 15 minutes. All of them, so some of them were not answered. Yeah, they all choose like some emotions. Yeah, we're thinking of something I haven't done yet, Dharma, as to send them by the feedback form to me, to be sending it without reading it to them.
Mine oma laua juurde.
Oh, yeah. I'm happy to do that. Yes, thank you. I need to choose 3. Yeah, exactly. And then you need to take one of these. Yeah, I'll do that one. And try to find the group where it's at the same color. Okay. Cool, perfect. So take your time. Only 3. Yeah, only 3.
probleemid ühised, siis ma võtan selle inspireeritud selle raamatust, mis mina saan jääda. Raamatus on kõik need asjad olemas. Ja väga positiivne on selles mõttes, et saasime oma otsustamist ja võtame positiivselt. Me ei pea olema selline eeskuju peab olema positiivne. Seda negatiivne eeskuju ei, ma võin seda öelda, et see, mis on arendus. Saate, see on midagi nagu arendus, see on minu jaoks nii arendus. Aga minu jaoks on, ja usu ilmselt inimesi on, samamoodi on need, keda see ärritab, samamoodi on see, keda ta täna tõstab, aga tegelikult taha minu jaoks eeskuju peab olema positiivne, seda ei ole positiivne. Minu jaoks on ka ärritav inimene, see on täitsa minu arvamus, et see on nagu autist ka, et tegelikult see, et meil on pandud õpetatud tarvi. Vot see on see point, aga kui sellest saaks nagu lahti, siis tegelikult see ei olegi see õige, et üks inimene nagu 1, 2, 3 tunnid on juba ühes kohas rohkem, teises kohas rohkem, see lõpuks levib. Aga lihtsalt kui minu jaoks on see, kui ma lihtsalt ma saan aru, et see kõik on õige, kuulud ja lootusetuse tunne, see kõik on õige. Aga mina lähtus just sellest, et kuidas mina saaks kaasa aidata.
nii-öelda kahe vahel, kes paremas on tõlkida. Jälle see, et ma tahan juua kohvit ja ma kavatsen süüa liha, aga samas ma tean, kuidas see mõjub. Ja igasugused mingid kahelased asjad, näiteks kuskil Euroopas alles hiljuti oli mingi tarkade inimeste mingi kliimakokkutööd, poliitikud, ühtede kõrvalilmad mis on häirib, vabandust, aga ma Greta teemal ja kui Greta esimest korda sai tehtud, siis tema väljendas sellega ennast leides, et õpipäevad sain koolis teada, vau, siuke asi koolis ei käi, vaid protesti. Kuidas sa saad maailma paremaks muuta, kui sa loobud koolis käimises, kui sa just ütlesid, et sa sead selle teadmiseks. Ja see, vabandust selle ajal, kui tal on mingi rumalad väited, et bambusest mingid asju, kuidas te loodust teostate. See on rohi, see nagu kasvab meetritega näha teos. Ja see on see, et inimene nagu taga peab ja need täiskasvab, kes seda bussis võivad ja sinna. Point on nagu hea, mida ta nagu üritab teha, ta nagu täiega annab käima pannud, kes positiivses, kes negatiivses mõttes käima pannud selle asja. Aga jälle see, kuidas ta ennast väljendab või kuidas ta põhjendab seda, see ei ole.
Tegelikult kui ajas tagasi minna, oli samamoodi suure välja suurenemise uued kambrumi lahvatuse ainult tekkis liikle juurde. Me ei saa niimoodi nagu täna suured tuntavad välja. See oli siis ka miljoneid aastaid tagasi, kui inimene ei reost. Kogu aeg on olnud.
Aga lihtsalt praegu ma saan aru, et on mingi rask.
Ega meie maailmas tegelikult me tapame ise ennast. Meie oleme näiteks esimesed hääled, et küll need kukkunud ja meie oleme
nemad saavad areneda, vaata tuleb ühe liigasme teine liiga ja nemad lõpuks jäävad alles.
Sest nii ilusti ütles keegi lauas õpetaja. No ongi tarbimiseks. Ja tegelikult ongi tarbimiseks, kõik tarbivad midagi. Lihtsalt inimene, kõik tarbivad midagi, aga lihtsalt inimene nagu on avastanud midagi, kuidagi loodus hakkama ei saa, seda ta saab.
Meie ei tee vaata seda süsiniku riikida, et kui mina praegu siia ära suren või see maja jääb kasutuseta, siis looduses on see paik lagunes ju selle
no seal ei ole bakterid, mis kõik
aga meist praegu jäävad aina mingid
meie elendame
ja betoon ja mingid asjad, et kui sa võtad mingi vana talumaja koos seal olevad
no see ongi see, mis ma ütlesingi, et lihtsalt inimene on loonud asju maailma, millega loodus hakkama ei saa. See on probleem.
Inimene on ainuke liik, kes iseenda kodukohta.
Aga lihtsalt ei saa ka mitte midagi sellega niimoodi võidelda, pigem ongi see teadlikkuse tõstmine. Aga see peab hakkamagi kuskilt kõik nagu, see ei saa hakata niimoodi, et ummakene kõik teistmoodi käitub, see on põlvkondadest läheb. Vaata nüüd ongi, ta läheb põlvkonna kaupa, praegu räägime, võib-olla meie lapsed käituvad teistmoodi. Ma mõtlen lapselapsed, aga kõik asjad võtavad nagu aega, sest et mugavusest loobumine on meie ühiskonna probleem, mitte järgmise probleem. Meie ei suuda sellest mugavusest loobuda. Aga me vähemalt, mis on ihan tore, mis me praegu kõik siin teeme, räägime endast taga. Aplaus meile nagu. On ju? Ise oleme loonud ju selle maailma.
Tegelikult ei oleks mingi Greta kus mul kaasas olema, siis ja see on eesti keelde tegelikult tõlgitud, siis ma võin teile korra näidata, siis see ei ole nagu mingi tema, selles mõttes tema kogukond, aga tegelikult siin on kõik need teemad eesti keeles.
Või noh, ta sai olla teadmised, kui
jah, ma kohe mõtlesin selle peale.
Et see ongi see kogutud data video selle kohta. Ma ei ole vaata seda materjali näinud, et mingi on hästi sarnast.
Ei, need on sarnast.
Lihtsalt siin ei ole vaata töövahendeid.
Ja siis, kui ma võtan seda raamatust võtta näitab mingi slaide versioon, kui sarnased hästi roheoskuste koolitused, hästi sarnased, mis on ju ühes kohas tõttu palju. Et selles
jaa, seda küll jah. see teadus.
Kas sa oled
No jaa, selles mõttes jah, see ongi selline karistöö. Aga minu emotsioonid on, ma ei teadnudki siis kumba valida nendest, sain see frustreeritud ja vihane, mis nende vahe on. Aga see viha on reidne see, et nagu inimeste rumalus, ma ei tunneta väga sükest, me ei näe mingite asjade tagajärgi, mida kui mina teen mingisuguse sammu, siis kuidas see mõjutab hästi mingit inimesed. Ma nagu teadsin sellest ära lennutamisega mulle tulemas, et noh, see ajab kõhale, kui sul on nii selge asi. See ei ole nagu, enne siin arutada, et banaan või apelsin, kõige suurema jälle või väiksema on. Aga mis video üksi ära lennutada kliimakonverentsil, kõik saan aru, et siin nägi et need on nagu sellised asjad, mis mind ajavad inimesed või mingisugused. Noh, see küsib on kõige pisem asi, aga noh, mingi ilmselge selline asi, mis on nagu väga ilmsed asjad, et kõik saavad aru, aga noh, ilmselt on võrdsemad, kes võrdsed. No ja, et jah, ei tea, kuidas seda on. Ja vaat ma ei tea, mis see frustreeritud on niisugune natuke võib-olla, ma ei tea, ei ole päris vahe vahel. Et sa oled ärritanud ja siis üritad nagu ikkagi rahulikult mõtta, aga sa oled nagu tahaks nagu vahel pakkuda. Aga mul on kas inspireeritud sellepärast, et tegelikult ja kogu sa, kui need iga laita sisse, ei siis tule ja siis tule ja aita, et igal, kuidas ma ka keskine teemadeni olen jõudnud, siis on lihtsalt üle maailma samamoodi saanud ja lennutatud riigi lennundas, leidsin kõik need probleemid üles ja siis mu mõte oligi see, et kui tulen selle Eestisse tagasi, siis mida me tehakse, kuidas mina saan panustada, milliseid lahendusi nendele probleemidele, siis need on kõik need asjad, mis ma edasi teinud olen. Et selles mõttes jah, see inspireeritud et andke aga nagu ette uut infot, et mis seda on ja tuleb neid mõtteid kogueda, mida siis teha, et nagu saada.
Näiteks minu praegu, minu jaoks on üllatus, sa teed meie 2 aega praegu. Et vaata, ma tulen nagu, ma loome kliimapaneeli ja siis ma vaatan, mida ägedaks. Täiesti mõttetult stressipalli. Ja mul ei mõte nagu, kuidas see saab enne korjata. Mis see neile, et mis sees oleks, kas ma peaks selle näha? Ei no ma mõtlesin, et ma näen, mul on nagu stress, ma trenni, ma liigutan ennast välja. Ma ei saa, vabandust, aga noh.
Miks seda nii?
No ma ei tea, vaata sama küsimus võib nagu esitada tagasi, siis teed et minu jaoks on näiteks kõik niisugused asjad on nagu naljakad, et jäta andmata. Aga see on see, ma saan aru, see on reklaami eesmärk, aga reklaami saab teha teistmoodi.
Aga siis see ongi mingi päriselt kasutatav asi, see paber võib-olla, mis me siin.
Ei, aga teine asi on see, anna inimestele näiteks, et mina ei tea, ostad mingi kohalik või tore ja too baasilt midagi sa süüa saad ja pane sinna kokku, osta Eesti loodud mingisugune asi, tee sinna.
Parendusest tegime.
Just, ja jätta ainult. Minu jaoks on need asjad nagu hästi.
Kas keegi on siit need Keiteringi kohvitassid?
Jaa. Te tahad kedagi, me veitsib süüda seda kustada.
Kes kokku kurjastab?
Jaa, see läheb nüüd pool muret.
Ei, ma tulingi tüdrukut tassida, et see on nõus.
Et need asjad on kõik näiteks, kui mina käisin rahastuste koolitusega ja kõik valitakse õige hotell, kõik on oma vähemalt ja siis on pudelivesi gaasiga, ilma gaasita, siis on tass, me läksime kohvitassiga ja võta kohvitassi, tule tagasi, kõik on ära korjatud.
Ja see olid need kohviga
ja kõik olid ära korjatud ja istun tükk aega mõtlesin. Ei, kusjuures me rääkisime sellel teemal nendega ja me võtsime selle teema üles ja tead, mis lõpuks oli toidunõud olid öelnud, või toit oli ja siis toit viidi minema ja küsisime, kuhu see läheb. Ja tead, mis ilmusid ka karbid. Ei, need olid natuke veel, Veno ei ole nii, need olid pappaga kiletatud sellest. Ja mõtlesin, et pikseegi tulid karbid. Ja siis tulid paberkotid, mis te hakkad ise ka mõtlema seal hotellis, et mis nüüd toimub. Meil tekkiski järgmine kord, oli juba meil pudel selles suures karakulis vesi. Midagi me tegime ja midagi nagu muutsid ja toidukarbid olid ka olemas, sa selle toidu kaasa võtta, sest hotellil ei ole õigust seda toitu jagada, sest ta ei saa vastutada selle säilimuse eest. Aga mina koolitusel oli ja ma võin seda toitu kaasa võtta. Oleks nüüd keegi mulle öelnud, võta kaasa näiteks mitte toidunõud, aga toidukarpani. Või isegi see, et võta kaasa toidunõud või tule oma veega. Juba siit saab seda rohaoskuste koolitust. Aga mõtlesin, et see ei ole nagu okei. Tegelikult kõik muu oli okei, nad ise olid ka sellest väga-väga erinevad.
Aga Kadri, me olime ise Kadri, jäätmevaba linna zero waste koolitusel, kus oli sama, tekiski see lõunapaus ja siis kõikide toidud olidki karpidega ja siis see pakendikarp oli nüüd pärast täis ja siis oli täpselt sama küsimus, kus valesti läks, jäätmevaba linna ja siis tekib.
Aga ei, seesama teema oli seal koolitusel üleval ja nad ise olid ka nagu järgmine kord.
Jah, see ongi mõelda see pakkuja enne pakkuja.
Ei, aga ja nüüd jõudsime järelduse, aga miks see nii on? Tema ostab veel, see on raha. Tema tellimise peale ta tellib ja ta paneb sulle gaasiga veel, ilma gaasita veel. Pisikesed pudelid ja lugemis. No mitte midagi sa nendega enam ei tee. Nagu mõtled, kuhu siis see asi viib. Ja need, kui sa niimoodi nagu hakkad mõtlema, siis tegelikult saab hakkama ja tegelikult saab ja ei saa, see peab olema nii, et ma võin olla vihane või ärritud või mõtlikseks segada. Kõik saab hakkama, saab aru ühest üksik inimesest, et üks, teine, kolmas, lõpuks on meil grupp, lõpuks on linn, lõpuks on riik, aga niimoodi.
Jah,